and welcome back to Naming in an AI Age. Today we are here on location and we are going to talk about opinions. Everybody seems to have an opinion, but some people share more than others. So on client calls and on presentations, how do you get people's opinions without them influencing the entire project or the room or how things go?
Yeah, and this is one of the hardest things to do, but I think one of the most important things to do. So there's something called anchoring bias, and there's a lot of research around this. If someone, for instance, in a negotiation, let's say you're trying to buy a house, and they throw out a number right off the bat, well then the conversation from that point forward is anchored in the number that was thrown out. So if you're the seller, you throw out a high number, right? And then that whole conversation's around negotiating around that high number, which is maybe ridiculously high, so you end up getting more money for the house. If you're the buyer, you throw out a low number. Same thing is true. So when it comes to naming, if someone throws out a name right off the bat or a style of name right off the bat, then the conversation tends to evolve around that name. So one of the things that we try to do in conversations is make sure that everyone understands that all opinions are welcome and not try to bias the conversation with advocating strongly for a particular style of name right out of the chute.
I think that's also, you do lean into a variety of styles too, not
Correct.
to just have all one style to where you're anchored in that set of names as well. I know that it depends on how large of a group you're working with. What's an ideal amount of people on the call to be able to get everyone's opinion, or do you always need every single person's opinion on the call? What's your perspective on that?
That's a hard nut to crack because we want on the call all the decision makers. It's hard though, especially in large companies, large clients, to get the most senior person on the call. The reason that's important though is they'll educate one another during the process. So someone will throw out a name and then there'll be a debate around that name. If the most senior person says something like, just bring me your top 3 names at the end of the process, well, they haven't had the value of understanding all the other options that have been considered, listening to the debate around why certain names were thrown out and why other names were considered, and influencing that conversation. So if they're not involved, what typically happens at the end is you'll present the top 3 names and they might say something like, well, these are okay, but what about this? Well, the what about this was something that we talked about in that first round. It's like, oh my gosh, had they just been there? Or they might suggest something like, I don't like any of these ideas, and they'll come up with something totally different that nobody even knew about had they just been involved in that first round. But going back to your question, what's the ideal number? I would say 6 to 8 folks in a call that's an hour long is a perfect number for everyone to have an opportunity to discuss. We can certainly do it. We've done it with just 3 or 4. And certainly if it's the founder and the founder just wants to be the only person involved and they're going to influence the rest of the conversation, it's just the founder. If we have 12, 15 or more, it's usually better to break it into 2 calls. Even though they don't get the benefit of hearing everyone else's opinion, at least they have more opportunity to voice their own opinion. We might have a different kind of discussion to share with them some of the thinking of the other groups to some of their point. But I would say 6 to 8 is probably the perfect size.
What we've started doing more recently is having a poll. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because that's before the conversation starts and why we do that specifically. There are quite a few people on the call.
What we've also found is if you have the decision maker on the call, and let's say that decision maker is somebody's boss's boss's boss, but they're in the trenches, they're the ones in the Marcom area or the Insights area, whatever, they're the ones that are charged with making the name come alive, so they've got to be on the call too. Well, they may feel a bit intimidated and not share their opinions quite as freely because they don't look dumb in front of the CEO of the company or the boss's boss, right? So what we do a couple things. First of all, we say we want everyone's opinion. We're not looking for consensus. We really want everyone to share a viewpoint that may be different regardless of who they are. That doesn't always work, right? So what we also do is we say at the end of the presentation, before there's any conversation around which names you like and you don't like, we're going to take a little poll. It's done anonymously. We'll give them a QR code and they can take their smartphones out and they can do it on camera. And the whole idea is you can vote for your top, let's say, 5 names, totally anonymously. And then we show the results of the poll before there's any conversation. And so now you actually can see the group's opinion as this is the name that maybe is the strongest. And we're not, again, looking for consensus, but at least you have some idea, well, these are the top 5. So if there was somebody that might have started the conversation really dissing a name or being nervous about sharing their opinion about a name, they feel very safe because they've been able to vote for a name, give it that first place vote, and then they can have a conversation and see, oh, others sort of like that name too, right? So that really, really helps. Then we open up the conversation afterwards.
I think it's a great way to do that. It manages expectations a little bit. It also provides that wiggle room for people that may not have the freedom to express their opinion, and it kind of stabilizes the room, I think, a little bit, to be able to openly discuss opinions based on, okay, what are the results? It doesn't matter if it's consensus or not, and it's also not necessarily one person's decision. There are a lot of different generations sometimes in the room. Sometimes the people making decisions aren't necessarily the target market, so it kind of balances that a little bit.
And that's a great point. For a lot of our B2C clients, they're going to be targeting a Gen Z or a millennial consumer. And there's not a single Gen Z on their side in the call. There may be some millennials, but maybe they're targeting a female millennial that has kids at home. There may be a few, but the majority of the team might not be in that segment. So you're asking the team to draw conclusions about a name when their target's underrepresented in the room or not represented at all. And that's a bit ridiculous. We used to be part of Nielsen, the market research firm, and Nielsen, of course, does quantitative research. So we love testing names. Even if you don't want to use us, we recommend that you test the name with your target and make sure that what you think is going to work is actually going to work. And that's usually a nice final check just to make sure you're heading in the right direction.
Oh, we could do a whole other podcast on name testing and how
sure.
you've learned to do it over the years. Well, thank you for joining us today. We talked about opinions and managing expectations and allowing for voices to be heard on client calls. We'll see you next time.
See ya.